Now I'm going to focus on the three goddesses and their triple aspects. None of them fit the maiden mother crone concept, which is a totally modern invention through those so-called Wiccans. Source material created by Robert Graves on hypothetical stuff and a whole lot of ad hoc nonsense. So let's get right to the nitty-gritty. A lot of the names for the goddess originally are lost. So we can only ascertain based on three things in order to understand how the goddesses were associated with the remaining 9 months and, like, basically, you know, the rest of the seasons of the year in association with the three aspects of Godin manifesting through natural cycles symbolically and represented by the triple horn spiral, which is in itself actually based off by the spirals anyway from ibex horns, and that's pretty much it. So anyway, that's what happens when you actually compare real archaeology with actual folklore, and the connections are pretty freaking consistent. So, where do we go from here? Well, there's only two goddesses for certain by name. They're definitely associated with the springtime aspect of God as Loki. And that is Glutz and Sigyn for certain. And people try to debate it, but they forget that Loki was also called Logathar, which is also Lugathar, which is also connected to the so-called Celtic Lug, or Lug. So, yeah, same figure. It's also called Lother, which means leader, literally. But we have to really be careful on this one, because the only other goddess that's associated with that part of the springtime cycle was called Othumbla, and called a cow. Well, most people made a lot of mistakes with that, because that's the same term for female reindeer. And you, in the next section, you'll catch on why that is. Anyway, so the only reasonable three goddesses would basically be associated as this, as, you know, goddesses dominating those particular months, and that would be Glutz, associated with January and the first glow of returning light from the cold winter. Othumbla, associated with February, pregnant, producing milk. So that's a most likely probable connection right there. That would make her a consort of Loki because of the springtime associations. And Sigyn, who is associated with Loki. But I wouldn't doubt that her name was also something like Bride or Bridget, to be honest. So that would also make more sense. So we have to take this with a huge chunk of salt, because the Eddas tend to be the only source of that. And there are other versions. So we can probably track down other names, but we don't need to go into all that. We just need to look at the association with each aspect of the goddesses through the remaining seasonal markers of the year. That is actually the legitimate way to be able to help track down the connections. But these would be three separate goddesses rather than one goddess in three forms for spring associated with Loki. You can look at it that way if you want, but that's really stretching it a bit, to be honest, especially with the way things are distorted. So we have to be careful. Now, the ones that are associated with summer would be, let's see, we have February, March. Okay, so we got April, May cycle turnover, associated with Loki. So we have about the May time period towards the end, middle, whatever, mostly associated with Frigg. Well, Frigg is an iffy name too, because it's also associated with the word Frigi, which means frigid, and also associated with the name Frigya, and which basically means the free one, literally. Might actually in itself be a naughty, nasty pun to try and paint her off as like a kind of like a hooker type figure. It does not mean beloved. Go back and actually look up the etymology for beloved. It's not there. It's not the name. And she's not exactly a Venus figure either. But she's definitely friendly in the sense of being compassionate, or more of a motherly figure in that respect. So Freya, Freyja is in fact the same goddess with just, different names. But she would be associated more, like I said, with May, with the flowers, and everything with that. The next one would be Fjordin, and it's likely that her name is actually drawn from the word fjord, which means an inlet, and she would then be associated with water coming into the fjords. It would literally be the goddess of fjords, and that would make more sense, because if you just add the D again to fjord, and then Jin, the feminine suffix, and call her Fjordja. Sounds similar to Freyja, but distinct for several reasons. So, pretty safe to lock her down associated with the month of June, and would make her kind of a Juno type figure, but not the same. Cultural differences. The next one would be Rind, also known as Rund, and again associated with the name Rowan for the mountain ash, the rowan tree, and is the same source as the word rune, and does not mean mystery. These all are tied to the root of the word meaning red. Rowan being associated with the red berries, and the season of July, where those berries could also be boiled down for, food sources, but if not properly prepared, could basically give you the craps. And was not uncommon for the mountain ash rowan to be used to make runes, or rune staves, for calendars. And rune staff is literally these bundles of sticks, the original effects, that were not used for lighting fires, except by those that wanted to destroy the calendars. But they did roll up, and they were composed of 13 in number for the lunar calendars. And the rune calendars are Rowan calendars, and therefore Rind calendars. And so anyway, Frigg, Fjorga, Freya, Fjordin, and Rind would all be associated with Godin in his aspect as Grimner, or Garnin. And you can probably find some Celtic associations. I haven't found any that are satisfactory myself. But again, we've got to use some caution, because these cultures are bound together far more closely than anybody's ever appreciated. So we can throw out a lot of those and try to keep it some sort of separatist, nationalistic nonsense. Moving on to the next one, which are definitively known as winter goddesses, is Angrboda, and she's associated with September, but she was also called things like Helboda, which means cold bringer. Angrboda literally means anger, could be anger bringer, which anger is the same as the modern English word anger. So it's questionable, but she would also be referred to the same figure that was referred to as the Witch of the Ironwoods. So Jarn Saxa, maybe. In any case, pretty safe to block her down for September, because she was literally the one that would be symbolic of bearing the message to the cold, icy air coming that winter was on its way. The next one that locks down, it makes more sense to be associated with the month of October, is Hela, also called Holly, and Holly, and many different variations like that, and also called Frau Holly. often confused with Freya or Frigg, but very clearly distinct. And the reason why she is often represented as half alive and half dead, and her name means to cover, means that she's like the transition point between full-on season of death and darkness, when up there in the northern regions everything starts getting really dark and you get cast into 24 hours of night for the rest of the year. But that goes over to the other goddess I'll mention here in a minute. So anyway, her half and half imagery is literally her as the transition messenger and representing the covering of snow on the ground when the snow really starts falling and everything gets covered up and it becomes impossible to get anything out of there, and it's the onset of the full-on over to only hunting, surviving. That's when we go over to the third, called Skandi, or Skadi. His name means shadowy, literally. And it would be the shadow of nighttime, the dark season, and again, she is associated with hunting. She's a huntress, and also associated with the Ulfar, the elves. And so it's pretty safe to say that locks her down right there with the month of November. So, the dark season. And most people are pretty solid and sure that she's the source of the name of Scandinavia. And that's probably more true than fiction, because where it's located tends to be the darker area of that part of the continent. And that's just the way it is. It's just the way the cycles go up there around Norway, Sweden, and all that, and Scandinavia. So, there you go. Pretty easy. Well, that would lock them all in as the three consorts of Ulfar, old Thor himself. So that would be the true association. Three winter goddesses with the Lord of Winter. No shock! So what would Godin be with them in association in the form of the Norns? Well, that would be the mythology hinted at by Snorri Sturluson under the name of Mim, or Mimir. And that would make him the all-knower, the oldest of all beings. Literally, prior to creation itself. And then we'd have to also accept that Circe would be an aspect of Odin in his destroyer aspect, but that in itself is questionable. Anything, and I don't have any reason to believe that there was anything legitimate about that source that was invented and was more or less created to create the necessary preset figure to work in to ultimate destruction of the old religion, replaced by the new religion, where Elder becomes a sort of metaphor for Jesus Christ and the man and woman, Leaf and Leaf Thrasher, coming out of the tree, a reference to Adam and Eve. So I could pretty much throw that out the fucking window. We all should. And that would tie in the three goddesses with more or less the general calendars that we have, and would also explain a lot of the symbolism. Oh, by the way, the representation of Odin's one eye closed and one eye open under the form of Grimner is really simple to explain. One eye is closed to the season of life and is opening up to the season of death, winter. And there's one more thing in folklore that actually has been ignored too, and this was only noted, I can't remember which was the other author that caught on to it himself, but somebody else have to look it up for me if you do see it posted in the comments, because I'd love to track that to read it again, but I'm pretty sure this is where it locks it all in. There's the phrase where Loki hands the horse off to Godin, or Odin, which is actually Grimner, to ride through the summer season before the onset of winter, hands it over to Ulder, and then hands it back at the end of the winter season back over to Loki in the spring. And the world state literally means the world horse, and the 8 directions are represented by the 8 legs. There you go.